Kim Tae-ho sat in the corner of the council chamber and wrote notes on his tablet like he always did. The other beings in the room talked loudly about trade routes and mining rights, while he kept his head down and typed quietly. Nobody looked at him twice. To them, he was just another human clerk who pushed papers around and stayed out of important conversations. The Galactic Council Station Nexus 7 spun slowly around the planet Kepler 442b, and Tae-ho could see the blue and green world through the massive windows. He had been working here for 3 years now as a diplomatic attaché under Ambassador Lee So-jin. Every day was the same routine of meetings and paperwork and polite smiles at beings who barely acknowledged his existence. Veltar raised one of his crystalline arms and the room went quiet. The Zephyrian council member looked like a walking diamond with too many sharp edges, and his voice sounded like breaking glass when he spoke. The human expansion into Sector 7 must be discussed, he said, and several other council members nodded their agreement. Tae-ho kept typing, but his fingers slowed down just a little. Sector 7 contained the trade routes that Earth needed for rare minerals. If the council blocked human access, it would hurt the colonies badly. Humans grow too bold, said Mordak, and his massive form shifted in the specially reinforced chair. The Corvani representative stood nearly 3 meters tall with thick gray skin covered in battle scars. His people were warriors who respected only strength, and they saw humans as soft creatures who hid behind technology instead of fighting with honor. Ambassador Lee So-jin cleared her throat from the human delegation table. The expansion follows all established protocols, she said in her calm, diplomatic voice. Human settlements have not violated any territorial agreements. Protocols. Mordak laughed and the sound echoed through the chamber like rocks falling. Your species writes many words on paper, but you are still children playing with toys you do not understand. Tae-ho looked up from his tablet for just a moment and caught Mordak's eye. The big alien sneered at him and Tae-ho quickly looked back down at his work. Inside his mind, something cold and sharp stirred, but he pushed it away like he had learned to do long ago. The meeting continued for another 2 hours with the usual arguments about territorial boundaries and trade restrictions. Tae-ho took notes and occasionally fetched coffee for the human delegation. When Ambassador Lee needed a document, he would quietly stand up and retrieve it from their files. Nobody paid attention to him moving around the room. After the session ended, Tae-ho helped pack up the human materials while the other species filed out in their various groups. The Zephyrians moved like walking prisms that bent light around them. The Corvani stomped heavily and spoke in their harsh guttural language. The insectoid Velkari clicked and chittered as they discussed the day's proceedings. Another productive day, Ambassador Lee said with tired sarcasm as she closed her briefcase. Sometimes I wonder if they even remember we exist, unless they need something to complain about. They notice us, Tae-ho said quietly while organizing his files. They just do not see us as equals. Lee looked at him with curiosity. In the 3 years they had worked together, she had never heard him express any opinion about galactic politics. He was always polite and professional, but never showed what he really thought about their situation. You think they underestimate humans? She asked. Tae-ho finished stacking his papers and gave her the same mild smile he always wore. I think every species believes they are superior to others, he said. It is natural to feel that way. That evening, Tae-ho returned to his small quarters on the residential level of the station. The room was standard diplomat housing with basic furniture and a small desk where he could work. On the wall next to his bed hung a few pictures of his family back on Earth. The largest photo showed him with his 19-year-old son Park Ji-woo at his graduation from preparatory school. Ji-woo looked so much like his mother with bright eyes and an easy smile. He was studying engineering at Seoul University now and sent messages to his father every few days about his classes and friends. Tae-ho picked up the photo and traced his finger along the edge of the frame. Ji-woo had wanted to join the military after graduation, but Tae-ho had convinced him to focus on his studies instead. The galaxy was becoming more dangerous, and Tae-ho wanted his son to have a peaceful life building things instead of destroying them. Behind the family photos was a small cabinet that Tae-ho kept locked. Inside were a few personal items from his past that he never looked at anymore. Sometimes late at night he could feel them calling to him like ghosts that refused to stay buried. But he had made a choice long ago to be a different kind of man, and he would not go back to what he used to be. His personal communication device chimed with an incoming message, and Taeho smiled when he saw it was from Jiwoo. His son was excited about a new engineering project and wanted to tell his father all about the design challenges they were working on. Taeho sent back encouragement and asked about his classes and whether he was eating enough. The next morning brought another council session about human territorial rights. This time the discussion focused on 3 star systems that humans had been surveying for possible colonization. The systems were far from any established alien territories, but several council members objected to human expansion in that direction. Perhaps the humans need a reminder about their place in this galaxy, Veltar said during a break in the proceedings. He spoke quietly to Mordak and 2 other council members near the refreshment area. Taeho was refilling the water dispensers nearby and could hear their conversation clearly. The beings never bothered to lower their voices around human staff members because they assumed humans were too weak or stupid to be a threat. The young ones learn lessons better than the old ones, Mordak replied with a cruel smile. A small demonstration might prevent larger problems later. Accidents happen in space travel, added Quindar the Ruthless, whose people controlled several shipping lanes between human colonies. Equipment fails and ships are lost. Very tragic, but these things cannot be prevented. Taeho continued filling water containers while listening to them plan. His hands stayed perfectly steady and his expression never changed. To anyone watching, he looked like a bored clerk doing routine maintenance work. The young human in the engineering program, Veltar continued. The son of that quiet attaché who takes notes all day. Such a shame if something happened to his transport back to Earth. An excellent choice, Mordak nodded. The father seems harmless enough, but even harmless creatures feel pain when their offspring are hurt. It will send the right message to their government about cooperation. Taeho finished with the water dispensers and walked calmly back to his seat. He opened his tablet and continued taking notes as the session resumed. His breathing stayed normal and his pulse did not change, but deep inside his mind, something that had been sleeping for many years began to wake up. That afternoon, he received a routine message on his official communication device during another meeting. It appeared to be a standard update from Earth's diplomatic corps about personnel changes and policy updates. But hidden in the bureaucratic language was a coded message that made Taeho's blood turn to ice. Transport vessel carrying Park Jiwoo had suffered catastrophic engine failure during routine flight from Luna Station to Earth. No survivors recovered from debris field. Accident investigation ongoing. But initial reports suggest mechanical failure due to stress fractures in primary drive coupling. Taeho read the message twice, then deleted it from his device. He looked around the council chamber at the aliens, who were still debating human expansion rights. None of them looked in his direction or showed any sign that they knew what had just happened. They were very good at hiding their involvement in accidents that happened far away from the station. He closed his tablet and folded his hands in his lap. For the first time in 3 years, his diplomatic mask began to slip just a little bit around the edges. Ambassador Lee noticed the change immediately. She had worked with Taeho long enough to know when something was wrong, even if he tried to hide it. After the session ended, she followed him back to his quarters. "Taeho," she said when they were alone in the corridor. "What happened? You look different." He turned to face her and she saw something in his eyes that had never been there before. It was cold and sharp and very, very dangerous. "I need to request emergency leave," he said in the same quiet voice he always used. "There has been a death in my family. The transport ship back to Earth took 5 days, and Taeho spent most of the journey sitting alone in his small passenger cabin. He did not eat much, and he did not sleep well. Other passengers tried to make conversation, but he gave short, polite answers that made them leave him alone. The ship's crew thought he was just another sad man going home for a funeral. If they had looked more carefully, they might have noticed how he memorized the ship's layout during his first day aboard. They might have seen how he counted the security cameras and noted the locations of emergency equipment. But people saw what they expected to see, and they expected to see a grieving father who worked a boring government job. Seoul looked the same, as always when Taeho arrived at the spaceport. Tall buildings stretched up toward the gray sky, and millions of people moved through the streets like they had somewhere important to go. He took a taxi to his old apartment building where his ex-wife, Dr. Han Subin, was waiting for him. Subin looked older than when he had last seen her 2 years ago. Her work as a xenobiologist kept her busy studying alien plant samples from the outer colonies, but she had taken time off to arrange their son's funeral. When she saw Tae-ho get out of the taxi, her eyes filled with tears again. "I cannot believe he is gone," she said as they embraced awkwardly in the building lobby. "The investigators say it was just a mechanical failure, but Jiwoo was so careful about checking his transport schedules." "Equipment fails sometimes," Tae-ho replied in the same calm voice he used for everything. "These things happen." Subin looked at him strangely. "How can you be so calm about this? Our son is dead and you act like nothing happened." Tae-ho did not answer her question. Instead, he asked about the funeral arrangements and what paperwork still needed to be completed. Subin showed him the official accident report and the death certificate and the forms from the university. Everything looked very official and very final. The funeral was held 2 days later at a small ceremony hall in the Gangnam district. About 50 people came to pay their respects, including some of Jiwoo's classmates and professors from Seoul University. They told stories about what a good student he had been and how much potential he had shown in his engineering studies. Tae-ho sat in the front row next to Subin and listened to everyone talk about their son. He nodded when people offered their condolences, and he thanked them for coming. His face showed the right amount of sadness, but something behind his eyes remained completely cold. After most of the guests had left, an older man in a military uniform approached Tae-ho near the memorial display. General Shin Dong-wook had gray hair now and more wrinkles around his eyes, but he still carried himself like a soldier. He had been Tae-ho's commanding officer many years ago during operations that were not supposed to exist in any official records. "I was sorry to hear about Jiwoo," the general said quietly. "He was a good boy." "Yes, he was," Tae-ho replied. "Perhaps we could take a walk," Dong-wook suggested. "I have something to discuss with you." They left the ceremony hall and walked through a nearby park where old men played chess and children ran around playground equipment. The general waited until they were far from other people before he spoke again. "The accident report has some interesting details," he said. "The type of failure that killed your son is very rare. It usually only happens when someone with advanced technical knowledge sabotages the drive systems." "Equipment fails sometimes," Tae-ho said again. "Yes, it does," Dong-wook agreed. "But not usually to the children of former special operations personnel, especially not personnel with your particular background." They stopped walking and faced each other beside a small pond. The general studied Tae-ho's face carefully and saw something there that reminded him of the old days when they had worked together on classified missions. "I know what you are thinking," Dong-wook continued. "But you have been retired for 20 years. You have a different life now." "I had a different life," Tae-ho corrected him. "That life included my son." The general nodded slowly. He had expected this reaction from the moment he heard about the accident. Tae-ho had always been the most dangerous operative in his command, but he had also been the most controlled. When his son was born, he had requested immediate retirement and never looked back. Until now. "The Titan incident was a long time ago," Dong-wook said. "People have forgotten what you were capable of back then." "Not all people," Tae-ho replied. They walked back toward the ceremony hall in silence. Before they separated, the general handed Tae-ho a small data chip that looked like an ordinary memory storage device. "If you decide you need information about current galactic intelligence operations," he said, "this might be useful, but I never gave it to you and we never had this conversation." That evening, Tae-ho returned to his old apartment where he had lived before taking the diplomatic posting. The building manager had kept his lease active and everything was exactly as he had left it 3 years ago. He sat at his old desk and inserted the data chip into his personal computer. The files contained detailed intelligence reports about Galactic Council activities and communications intercepts from the past 6 months. Agent Choi Hee-ri from Human Intelligence had been monitoring alien diplomatic channels, and she had discovered something very interesting in the weeks before Ji-woo's death. According to the intercepted messages, several council members had been discussing ways to send stronger messages to human expansion efforts. They had specifically mentioned targeting family members of diplomatic personnel to create emotional pressure on human negotiators. The communication stopped abruptly 3 days before the transport accident that killed Ji-woo. Tae-ho read through every file twice and memorized the important details. Then he deleted everything from his computer and destroyed the data chip. He sat back in his chair and looked around the apartment at all the things from his old life. In the bedroom closet, behind some old civilian clothes, was a sealed storage container that he had not opened in 20 years. Inside were items from his military service that he had kept for reasons he could not fully explain. His old tactical gear was there, along with some weapons and equipment that were supposed to have been returned to the armory when he retired. At the bottom of the container was a small metal case containing his service records and commendations. The official documents listed him as Sergeant Kim Tae-ho of the 15th Special Operations Division. But there were other files in the case that used a different name. Codename Reaper had been active for 12 years across 47 different worlds during humanity's expansion into contested space. His confirmed kill count was exactly 1,000 enemy combatants, including some very high-value targets that other species still did not know were assassinations rather than accidents. Tae-ho closed the case and put everything back in the storage container. He was not that person anymore, and he did not want to become that person again. But his son was dead, and the people responsible thought they were safe because they saw only a harmless diplomat who pushed papers around. The next morning he visited Soo-bin at her laboratory to tell her he was returning to the Galactic Council station. She was upset that he was leaving so soon after the funeral, but he explained that his work required him to complete his current assignment. "Sometimes I think you care more about your job than your family," she said angrily. "Even now, when Ji-woo is gone, you cannot wait to get back to your precious diplomatic meetings." "I care about finishing what I started," Tae-ho replied. Captain Yoo Min-ho from Human Intelligence met with Tae-ho at the spaceport before his departure. The captain had worked with Agent Choi Hee-ri to analyze the intercepted alien communications, and he wanted to brief Tae-ho personally about their findings. "We are 90% certain that your son's death was not an accident," Min-ho said, as they sat in a private conference room. "The council members involved covered their tracks very well, but we found enough evidence to prove deliberate sabotage." "What kind of evidence?" Tae-ho asked. "Communication fragments mentioning timeline coordination and target selection criteria. Payment authorizations to independent contractors who specialize in making accidents look natural. Transport manifest. Alterations that put your son on that specific ship instead of his original booking." The captain showed Tae-ho several documents and recordings that painted a clear picture of premeditated murder, disguised as mechanical failure. The people responsible had planned everything carefully, and they had picked Ji-woo specifically because they knew it would hurt his father. "What do you intend to do with this information?" Tae-ho asked. "Nothing officially," Min-ho admitted. "We cannot prove their involvement in a way that would hold up in Galactic Court. The evidence is strong enough for intelligence purposes, but not for legal prosecution." "Then why are you showing me this?" Captain Min-ho studied Tae-ho's face for a long moment before answering. "Because General Shin told me who you used to be, and because some problems require unofficial solutions." "I am a diplomat now," Tae-ho said. "I attend meetings and file reports and negotiate trade agreements." "Of course you are," Min-ho agreed. "And when you return to the council station, you will continue to do your diplomatic duties exactly as you always have. But if certain council members happen to have accidents of their own, well, those things happen sometimes in space." Tae-ho returned to his duties on the council station like nothing had changed. He attended the morning briefings with Ambassador Lee Sojin and took notes during the afternoon sessions. He organized files and prepared reports and fetched coffee for the human delegation. Everyone who worked with him thought he seemed a little quieter than usual, but they understood that losing a child would affect any parent that way. What they did not notice was how his routine had changed in small but important ways. When he walked through the station corridors, he counted the security cameras and memorized their angles of coverage. During his coffee runs, he observed the guard rotations and noted which areas had fewer personnel at different times of day. While organizing diplomatic files, he studied the station schematics that were included in emergency procedure documents. Ko Jin-soo was the station security chief, and he had worked with human diplomats for several years. He was a friendly man who liked to talk about his family back on his home world, and he often stopped by the human offices to chat with the staff. Taeho had always been polite to him, but never very talkative until recently. "How are you holding up?" Jin-soo asked one afternoon when he found Taeho working late in the diplomatic archives. "I heard about your loss and I wanted to offer my condolences." "Thank you," Taeho replied while continuing to sort through old treaty documents. "Work helps keep my mind occupied." "That is good," Jin-soo said. "Staying busy is important during difficult times, but you should also make sure to get enough rest. These late nights are not healthy." "I have trouble sleeping lately," Taeho admitted. "Sometimes I walk around the station when I cannot rest. The corridors are very peaceful at night." Jin-soo nodded with understanding. "The night shift is much quieter than the day shift. Most of the diplomatic staff are asleep, so there is less activity in the residential sections. I often do my own patrol walks during those hours." "What time do you usually make your rounds?" Taeho asked with casual interest. "Between midnight and 3 in the morning, typically. That is when most incidents happen, if they are going to happen at all. People think the late hours provide better cover for mischief." Taeho made a mental note of this information while pretending to focus on his filing work. Over the next few weeks, he had similar conversations with other security personnel and maintenance staff. Everyone was happy to talk about their duties because the human attaché seemed genuinely interested in learning how the station operated. Bae Young-min was Taeho's official assistant, and he had been working in the diplomatic corps for only 6 months. He was eager to learn, and he admired how organized and efficient Taeho was with all the paperwork and scheduling. What he did not realize was that his supervisor was using him to gather information about things that had nothing to do with diplomacy. "Could you check with the maintenance office about getting some additional supplies for our quarters?" Taeho asked him one morning. "I need a plasma cutter for emergency hull breach procedures, and some magnetic clamps for securing sensitive documents during transport." "Of course," Young-min replied. "Should I also request the industrial cleaning solvents that were mentioned in the last safety briefing?" "Yes, that would be very helpful. And see if they have any of those new molecular bond accelerators that are supposed to improve equipment reliability." Young-min dutifully submitted the supply requests without questioning why a diplomatic office would need such specialized equipment. The requisition forms were approved automatically because human staff were considered trustworthy, and their requests were usually routine office supplies. The council sessions continued with the same arguments about human expansion and territorial rights. Veltar and Mordak seemed particularly aggressive in their opposition to any human presence in the disputed sectors. They made speeches about protecting the galaxy from human contamination, and they suggested that stronger measures might be necessary to contain the threat. During one session, Mordak stood up and pointed directly at the human delegation table. "Perhaps these creatures need a more personal reminder of their limitations," he said with a cruel smile. "Sometimes tragedy teaches lessons that diplomacy cannot." Ambassador Lee looked confused by this comment, but Taeho understood exactly what the Corvani representative meant. He continued taking notes on his tablet while watching Mordak's face. The big alien was enjoying himself because he thought he had hurt the humans without any consequences. "What do you think he meant by that?" Lee asked Taeho after the session ended. "Some species use intimidation tactics when they feel frustrated by negotiations," Taeho replied in his usual diplomatic tone. "They make vague threats hoping to gain psychological advantages." That evening there was a formal diplomatic dinner in the station's main banquet hall. Representatives from all the major species attended along with their staff members and security details. Taeho helped serve the meal as part of his regular duties, and this gave him opportunities to observe the alien dignitaries up close. He noticed that Veltar could not tolerate certain types of acidic foods because of his crystalline biology. Mordak had allergies to several common spices that were used in Corvani cooking. Quindar the Ruthless preferred to eat alone because his species considered sharing meals to be a sign of weakness. "The human servant is very attentive tonight," Veltar commented to his companions as Teho refilled his water glass. "Perhaps losing his offspring has made him more eager to please his superiors." "Grief makes all creatures more compliant," Mordak agreed. "It is a useful tool for maintaining proper hierarchies." Teho's hand stayed perfectly steady as he poured water into crystal glasses. His expression remained polite and professional, even as he listened to them discuss his son's death, like it was a successful business transaction. When he finished serving their table, he moved on to the next group of diners without showing any reaction. Later that night, he returned to his quarters and made an encrypted communication to Earth using his personal device. The message appeared to be a routine update to his family about his work schedule, but hidden within the text was a coded authorization request that had not been used in 20 years. "Authorization code Reaper 77, he transmitted. "Request activation of Phantom Protocol for deep cover termination assignment. Duration estimated at 2 weeks maximum. Confirmation required for operational parameters." The response came back 6 hours later, disguised as a message from his bank about account maintenance. "Authorization confirmed. Phantom Protocol active. All operational discretion granted. Cleanup support standing by. Account balance updated accordingly." Teho deleted both messages and began preparing for the next phase of his mission. He moved his newly acquired supplies from the storage closet to various hiding places throughout his quarters and the diplomatic offices. The plasma cutter was concealed inside a food preparation unit. The magnetic clamps were hidden in a maintenance panel behind his desk. The chemical solvents were transferred to cleaning supply containers that looked completely ordinary. During his regular duties, he continued mapping the station layout and memorizing the personal schedules of various council members. Veltar always returned to his quarters at exactly 10:30 each evening after spending 2 hours in the meditation chambers. Mordak exercised in the gymnasium every morning from 6 to 7, and then ate breakfast alone in his private dining room. The other council members had their own predictable routines that made them vulnerable at specific times and places. They felt safe on the neutral station because they believed the security arrangements protected them from any serious threats. None of them considered that the real threat might be wearing a diplomatic uniform and serving their meals. Teho also spent time studying the psychological profiles of his targets that were included in the intelligence files Captain Minho had provided. Each council member had specific fears and weaknesses that could be exploited during the elimination process. Some were afraid of heights, while others had phobias about confined spaces or particular types of pain. "You seem much more focused lately," Ambassador Lee observed during one of their morning briefings. "I know this assignment has been difficult, but your work quality has actually improved since you returned from Earth." "I have found a new sense of purpose," Teho replied honestly. "Sometimes personal loss helps clarify what is truly important." "I am glad to hear that. We will need everyone performing at their best during the upcoming negotiations about the Outer Rim territories. The Council seems determined to block human expansion regardless of our legal rights." "They are certainly very confident about their position," Teho agreed. That afternoon, he received notification that the Council had officially closed the investigation into the transport accident that killed his son. The case was classified as mechanical failure due to equipment stress, and no further action would be taken. The aliens responsible for murdering Jiwoo were now protected by diplomatic immunity and galactic law. Teho read the official notice twice and then filed it with the other diplomatic correspondents. He made no comment about the decision and showed no emotional reaction to the news. To anyone watching, he appeared to accept the ruling with the same resignation that marked all his other work. But that evening he began the final preparations for his real mission. The first death happened on a Tuesday morning during what should have been a routine council session about mining rights in the Kepler system. Veltar had been arguing for increased restrictions on human industrial activities when he suddenly stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. His crystalline form shimmered, and then he collapsed onto the chamber floor with a sound like breaking glass. Dr. Kang Mi-young was the senior medical officer on duty, and she arrived within minutes to examine the body. Veltar appeared to have died from some kind of systemic failure, but there were no obvious external injuries or signs of violence. His internal crystalline structure had simply stopped functioning, as if someone had turned off a switch. "I need to run more detailed scans," Dr. Kang told Commander Nexval, who was overseeing the investigation. "But preliminary examination suggests natural causes. Sometimes older Zephyrians experience spontaneous crystal lattice collapse." "How often does this happen?" the commander asked. "Rarely," she admitted. "Maybe once every few thousand years, according to their medical records." But Veltar was quite elderly by their standards. Security Chief Ko Jin-soo reviewed the video footage from the council chamber and found nothing suspicious. The cameras showed Veltar speaking normally and then falling over without any external interference. No one had approached him or made threatening gestures. The human diplomatic staff had been sitting quietly at their table, taking notes like they always did. Taeho expressed appropriate concern about the tragic incident when Jin-soo interviewed all the session attendees. "Veltar seemed fine during our previous meetings," he said. "I hope his family will be notified promptly about this loss." "Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior today?" Jin-soo asked. He was perhaps more animated than usual during his speech about mining restrictions. But many council members become passionate when discussing territorial issues. The security chief made notes in his report and moved on to interview the next witness. Taeho returned to his quarters that evening and carefully cleaned the specialized equipment he had used to generate a high-frequency resonance pulse that disrupted Zephyrian crystal matrices. The device was now hidden again inside his food preparation unit, where no one would think to look for it. 3 days later, Quindar the Ruthless was found dead in his private dining chamber during what appeared to be a meal break between sessions. The Velkari representative had been eating alone, as was his custom, when he suddenly went into violent convulsions and died within minutes. Foam covered his mandibles, and his compound eyes had turned completely black. Dr. Kang performed another examination and determined that Quindar had died from acute poisoning. The toxin appeared to be derived from a rare plant that grew on several outer rim worlds, but it was not something that would normally be found in station food supplies. "Could this have been an accident?" Commander Nexval asked during the briefing. "About the second death." "Possible, but unlikely," Dr. Kang replied. "The concentration was far too high to be accidental contamination. Someone would have had to deliberately introduce a substantial amount of the toxin into his food." "Who had access to his dining chamber?" "All the food service personnel and any diplomatic staff who were assigned serving duties. The Velkari prefer to eat alone, so there were no other guests present." Jin-soo expanded his investigation to include background checks on all station personnel who had been near the dining areas during the past week. The list included dozens of beings from multiple species, including several humans who worked in food service or diplomatic support roles. Taeho was questioned again, along with everyone else who had been serving meals to council members. He provided a detailed account of his duties and schedule that matched perfectly with the official work logs. Security footage confirmed that he had been in the council chamber during the estimated time of death. "I did deliver a fruit beverage to Quindar's chamber earlier in the day," Taeho admitted when asked about his contact with the victim. He had requested something from his home world to accompany his afternoon meal. "Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior?" Jin-soo asked. He seemed somewhat agitated about the morning's discussion regarding trade route security, but that appeared to be normal frustration rather than illness. The security chief continued his investigation but found no clear evidence pointing to any specific suspect. The toxin could have been introduced at multiple points during food preparation or delivery, and there were too many people with potential access to narrow down the possibilities. Meanwhile, the remaining council members were becoming nervous about the 2 sudden deaths. Some suggested that the station might have environmental hazards that were affecting certain species more than others. Others wondered if there was a saboteur among the support staff who was targeting alien dignitaries. Mordak demanded increased security around all council members and their quarters. "These deaths are too convenient," he declared during an emergency session. "Someone is eliminating beings who oppose human expansion, and we must assume this is not coincidence. Ambassador, Lee So-jin strongly objected to the implication that humans were involved in the deaths. Both victims died from causes that human physiology could not have survived, she pointed out. It makes no sense for our people to use methods that would be equally deadly to ourselves. Perhaps that is exactly what the killers want us to think, Morduk replied suspiciously. The arguments continued for hours while Taeho sat quietly taking notes and observing the remaining council members. There were still 4 aliens who had been involved in planning his son's murder, and he was already working on the next phase of his elimination schedule. That night he made another death look like an accident. Zolran the Ancient was found in his meditation chamber the following morning with no signs of violence or struggle. The elderly ethereal appeared to have simply faded away during his evening contemplation ritual. His people sometimes died this way when their life energy was exhausted, but it usually happened gradually over several days, rather than suddenly. Dr. Kang was becoming frustrated with the series of unexplained deaths. 3 fatalities in 1 week is extremely unusual, she told Commander Nexvol. Even accounting for the advanced age of some victims, this pattern suggests external factors. What kind of external factors? The commander asked. Unknown toxins in the environment, sabotage of life support systems, deliberate poisoning or assassination. I cannot determine the exact cause without more sophisticated equipment than we have available on this station. Are the remaining council members in immediate danger? I would have to say yes based on the statistical probability. If this pattern continues, we could lose several more representatives within the next few days. Commander Nexevol ordered enhanced security protocols for all surviving council members. Guards were stationed outside their quarters around the clock, and all food was tested before being served. No unauthorized personnel were allowed near the diplomatic areas without escort. But the deaths continued anyway, because the killer was not an unauthorized person sneaking around in the shadows. He was an authorized diplomatic attaché who had legitimate reasons to be anywhere on the station at any time. His security clearance gave him access to restricted areas, and his official duties required him to interact with council members on a regular basis. Kethmore the Proud died in his exercise facility while using gravity training equipment that had been recently serviced. The mechanical failure that crushed him appeared to be caused by stress fractures in the support structure, but investigation revealed that someone had deliberately weakened the critical components, using precise tool marks that were almost impossible to detect. Velnath the Deceiver was found dead in his quarters with no apparent cause of death at all. His body showed no signs of trauma or poisoning or disease. He had simply stopped living sometime during the night while lying peacefully in his bed. Dr. Kang could not explain how this was possible using any known method of assassination. We are dealing with someone who has extensive knowledge of alien physiology and access to very sophisticated weapons or techniques. She reported to the emergency security meeting. Each death has been tailored specifically to the victim's species and biology. How many people on this station would have that level of expertise? Commander Nexvol asked. Very few. Maybe a dozen medical personnel and some of the xenobiology researchers, possibly some military specialists if they had previous experience with multi-species operations. Jinsu looked through the personnel files for anyone with the required background and training. The list was surprisingly short, and it included several humans who had served in the military before taking civilian positions. But all of them had solid alibis for the times when the deaths occurred. What about the diplomatic staff? He asked Dr. Kang. Do any of them have medical or military experience? Not according to their official records. Most diplomats have backgrounds in political, science, or international relations rather than technical fields. But Taeho's official records did not mention his 12 years of special operations service or his extensive training in assassination techniques. Those files were classified at levels that station security personnel could not access, even during murder investigations. The council chamber fell completely silent when Taeho activated the security locks from the control panel beside the main doors. The magnetic seals engaged with a deep humming sound that meant no one could enter or leave the room without his permission. The surviving council members looked around nervously as they realized they were trapped with the quiet human who had served their meals for the past 3 years. What is the meaning of this? Mordak demanded while reaching for the emergency communicator on his belt. His fingers found only empty air because Tejo had already disabled all the communication devices in the chamber, using a signal jammer hidden in his diplomatic briefcase. Please remain calm, Tejo said in the same polite voice he had always used during meetings. This will not take very long if everyone cooperates. The 4 remaining council members were Mordak the Corvani warrior, Vexith the cunning from the spider-like Arachnari species, Quindar's replacement, Yulneth, the merciless, who represented the insectoid Velkari, and Elder Korshan, who spoke for the energy beings known as the Luminari. They had been discussing emergency evacuation procedures when Tejo sealed the chamber. You are that human attaché who takes notes, Vexith observed with her multiple eyes studying him carefully. Why have you locked us in here? Because we have business to conclude, Tejo replied while removing several items from his briefcase. You killed my son, and now we must discuss the consequences of that decision. Mordak laughed harshly and flexed his massive muscles. Your offspring died in an accident human. These things happen when inferior species try to travel through space without proper safety measures. The accident was very well planned, Tejo said as he assembled what looked like a medical scanner, but was actually a weapon designed to disrupt specific types of alien nervous systems. The sabotage was quite professional, almost as professional as the people who ordered it. Elder Korshan's energy form flickered with what might have been fear or surprise. You cannot prove any connection between council decisions and random equipment failures, he said in his ethereal voice. I do not need to prove anything, Tejo replied calmly. This is not a legal proceeding. This is a settlement of accounts. He activated the device and pointed it at Yulneth, who immediately began convulsing as his nervous system was overloaded with electromagnetic pulses. The Velkari representative collapsed onto the floor with his limbs twitching helplessly while foam leaked from his breathing vents. Stop this immediately, Vexith shrieked while backing away toward the far wall. You cannot murder council members. There will be massive retaliation against your entire species. There will be no retaliation, Tejo said as he watched Yulneth die slowly and painfully. Because no one will know what really happened here. The official report will blame another tragic accident on faulty environmental systems. Mordak charged forward with a roar of rage, but Tejo was no longer the mild diplomat who had served him dinner just hours earlier. The human moved with deadly precision and buried a molecular blade between the Corvani's armored plates before the big alien could reach him. Mordak's momentum carried him past Tejo and he crashed into the council table while purple blood poured from the wound. That was for suggesting that my son needed to learn a lesson, Tejo said quietly as Mordak struggled to stay conscious. Children should not pay for their parents' mistakes. Who are you? Vexith whispered in horror as she realized that the harmless clerk had become something much more dangerous. I used to be codename Reaper of the Human Special Operations Division, Tejo replied while preparing another weapon from his collection. I retired 20 years ago to raise my son in peace, but retirement is over now. He showed her a small device that looked like a standard diplomatic communication unit. This contains a complete record of every council member who participated in planning Jiwoo's murder. Your names and your conversations and your payment authorizations to the saboteurs who destroyed his transport. Elder Korshan tried to use his energy manipulation abilities to disable the human's weapons, but discovered that Tejo had shielded all his equipment against such attacks. You have been planning this for a long time, the Luminari observed. Since the moment I learned what you did to my child, Tejo confirmed. Every day for the past month I have been preparing to kill each of you in ways that would cause maximum suffering while appearing to be natural deaths. The others who died, Vexith said with growing understanding. Veltar and Quindar and the rest, that was you. Veltar died from harmonic resonance that shattered his crystal matrix. Quindar was poisoned with toxins from his own home world. Zulran's life energy was drained using techniques I learned during the ethereal campaign. Each death was customized for the victim. Mordak was still alive but weakening rapidly from blood loss. Your species will pay for this, he gasped. When The galaxy learns that humans murdered council members, there will be war. The galaxy will learn that council members started dying after they murdered the son of a human diplomat. Tejo corrected him, and they will understand that some actions have consequences that extend beyond legal immunity. He activated another device, and Elder Korshan's energy form began to fluctuate wildly as his quantum coherence was disrupted. The luminary's desperate attempts to maintain stability failed as his consciousness scattered across multiple dimensional frequencies. His death scream echoed through spectrums that most beings could not even perceive. 3 down and 2 to go, Tejo said while checking the remaining power in his weapons. We are making excellent progress. Vexith had been slowly moving toward one of the emergency communication panels, but Tejo noticed her attempt and blocked her path. Those systems are already disabled, he told her. No one can hear you, and no one is coming to help. What do you want from us? She asked desperately. We can negotiate compensation for your loss, credits or territory or favorable trade agreements. I want you to understand what it feels like to lose someone you care about, Tejo replied. But since your species does not form emotional attachments, I will have to settle for teaching you about fear instead. He produced a small vial of clear liquid and showed it to her. This contains a neurotoxin that is specifically designed to affect Arachnari nervous systems. It will take approximately 30 minutes to kill you, and you will remain conscious for most of that time while your motor functions shut down one by one. Please, Vexith begged. I will do anything you want. I will support human expansion into any territories you desire. My son wanted to be an engineer, Tejo said as he prepared an injection device. He was going to build things that would make the galaxy better for everyone. But you decided that killing him would send a message to humanity about our place in your hierarchy. He injected the toxin into her primary nerve cluster and stepped back to watch her reaction. Now you can send a different message. You can tell whatever gods you believe in that human children are not acceptable targets for political manipulation. Vexith collapsed as the poison began shutting down her nervous system, but she remained aware and able to speak. This will not end with us, she whispered. Others will continue our work. Then others will join you in death. Tejo replied without emotion. I have been killing aliens for longer than most beings have been alive. Adding a few more names to the list will not trouble my sleep. Mordek made one final attempt to reach his emergency beacon, but the effort was too much for his damaged body. He died while staring at Tejo with hatred and disbelief that a human could have defeated him so easily. 4 down and 1 to go, Tejo announced while turning his attention to Vexith, who was still alive but paralyzed. But I think we will wait a little longer before finishing this conversation. I want you to have time to reflect on your choices. He sat down in his usual chair and opened his tablet to review some diplomatic notes while Vexith slowly died from the neurotoxin. The chamber was now filled with alien corpses, but Tejo looked as calm and professional as he had during any routine council session. You know what the most interesting part of this situation is, he said conversationally. Your people made detailed plans to murder my son, but you never bothered to investigate who his father actually was. If you had done basic research, you would have discovered that retired special operations personnel are generally poor choices for intimidation tactics. Vexith tried to respond but could no longer control her vocal cords. Her multiple eyes tracked Tejo's movements, but she was completely helpless as the poison continued its work. The official records will show that environmental system failures caused multiple fatalities during an emergency council meeting. Tejo continued. Atmospheric contamination from a reactor leak will explain the various symptoms, and the sealed chamber will account for why no one could escape in time. He activated a device that began releasing trace amounts of radioactive particles into the air circulation system. The contamination would be detectable, but not dangerous to the investigation teams who would examine the scene later. When Vexith finally died, Tejo cleaned and packed away all his specialized equipment. He arranged the bodies to look like they had been trying to reach the emergency exits when the contamination overwhelmed them. Then he activated his personal emergency beacon to summon help.